Tonight, Hurricane Estelle's ragged nature continues as its peak comes to an end. Now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 19th. Well, here we are with another wide view of the tropics, and we have Hurricane Estelle, which continues to struggle to intensify, still at Category 1 intensity in the Eastern Pacific, and that's the only storm that's active in the meantime. 36 storms have formed so far this year. The average for the whole year is 92, which means we're only about 1/3 of the way through. It's day 49 of the Atlantic hurricane season. There are no systems active and unexpected in the next 5 days. Not much in the models regarding anything, with a lot of the ensembles not really wanting anything for the remainder of July, so looks like things for the meantime are looking pretty quiet. In the Eastern Pacific, it looks like this. We have Hurricane Estelle, of course, with winds of 80 miles an hour and a pressure of 986 millibars, currently on the 66th day of hurricane season. There's another area of interest to the south of Mexico that could also develop late this week into early next week. In the Western Pacific, it's pretty quiet here. There are no systems active and unexpected in the next 5 days. GFS is hinting at something, but it's the only model to hint at something, anything rather. We'll be taking a look at that in the models like we always do, as that is what we usually look at, the GFS side of things at least. North Indian Ocean, it's pretty quiet now that Invest 96A is finally gone. Looks like enough 0% chances was enough to kill it finally. And now we are back to normal monsoon season. It's summer, nothing goes on, and now we just wait for Invest 97 whatever from some pointless thing. You can see what Hurricane Estelle looks like. It's looking more and more ragged. In fact, it looks like it's a little bit worse in recent frames. Impressive outflow, it's just its entire internal structure just does not look healthy at all right now, with little strengthening, if any, expected before it starts weakening due to cooler sea surface temperatures and drier air tomorrow. Here's the Atlantic satellite imagery, and you can see what's going on here. Not much going on besides a pretty large tropical wave exiting off from the African coast right now. However, it will be dealing with quite a bit of shear, so little development is expected with that one. In the Eastern Pacific, you can quite clearly see Hurricane Estelle. It's a lot larger than Darby was, but that is to be expected given the fact that Darby was pretty small. You can't really see the disturbance that's going to be coming into the Eastern Pacific as yet, because that is still several days away. Western Pacific, there's a mess in the South China Sea. There's also a few disturbances in the low latitudes and off the Japan coastline. Other than that, not really much going on in the mid latitude side of things. It's pretty quiet there. North Indian Ocean, you can see that pretty much nothing is left out of 96A. It's completely gone at this point. You can also see that the monsoonal activity has suppressed itself a bit in the Bay of Bengal. Southwestern Indian Ocean looks like this. It's pretty quiet with some cloud cover going on in the lower latitudes up north there. But other than that, it's pretty dry as it has been for quite some time across the Madagascar coastline. For the Australian region, it's looking pretty quiet as well. Not much going on, and that's still remaining the case. Vanuatu and the Indonesian and Solomon Islands looking pretty good. Not much going on there either. Looking at the Eastern Pacific sea surface temperatures, it's around 28 to 29 to the south of Mexico, though there is, of course, some of that upwelling starting to trickle in from Estelle. In the Gulf of Mexico, it's around 28 to 29, with those 30 degrees Celsius temperatures confined to the coast and in the northeastern Gulf of Mexico. The Western Atlantic is looking pretty warm as well, with temperatures 29 to 30 degrees Celsius in the Gulf Stream. Main development region looking around 28 to 29. Caribbean, same thing, around 27 to 28. Looking into the Arabian Sea, it's around 27 to 28 in the northern part, before it does drop off into the 24 and 25 section as you head closer to the southwest areas. In the Bay of Bengal, it's around 28 to 29 throughout the majority of the basin, and as you head into the Western Pacific, it's around 28 to 29 across the entirety of the basin, to the south of Japan at least. Once you get north of there, it's around 24 to 25, and sharpening gradients as you head much north because of, how it normally is. But regardless to say, it's not much different. Most of the 30 degrees Celsius temperatures still confined to the east of the Philippines. Here are the sea surface temperature anomalies, and you can see there's a giant spot of way above average temperatures to the south of Alaska, as well as the anomalously warm temperatures that have been somewhat reducing in size in the Japan and areas north of that area. Atlantic is still looking above average for the most part, Eastern Pacific around average, and then as you head into the ocean heat content side of things, you can see the Eastern Gulf of Mexico death spot still remaining. Caribbean's continuing to see more of that ocean heat content, as well as the southern part of the main development region. Western Pacific, it's still got those high ocean heat content values to the east of the Philippines, but as you go into the Eastern Pacific, those values do drop off a cliff dramatically. Really not much going on. It's been the case for pretty much the entire season. Kicking it off with the short range, you can see what is going on right now. That is, of course, Hurricane Estelle, and what is expected to be doing in the next bit here. You can see it expected to start weakening probably within the next 24 hours, although the GFS for some reason maintains it for the next 48 hours, interesting enough, before starting to weaken it. Once again, GFS tends to be aggressive, and in this case their aggressive situation is keeping the storm the same intensity for 2 days. I don't really think that's going to happen, but we are expected to see that weakening, and eventually does become that remnant low by day 4. And you can see that disturbance that the National Hurricane Center has marked begin to form to the south of Guatemala and El Salvador. Eventually ends up becoming a tropical storm or tropical depression by hour 120. Looks like it's a tropical depression based off the latest run here. As of right now, there are no other storms expected anywhere, which is why we have no areas of interest, and that's basically all we've got for the models covering up to hour 120 as a result. Here's a look at the longer range stemming from hour 120 and going up to hour 240, and once again we're looking at the Eastern Pacific, specifically this area of interest as the National Hurricane Center has marked, and of course the fact that Estelle by this point is pretty much dead. You can see what ends up happening. It looks like the GFS doesn't really want much of a strong storm out of this, which is rare considering the fact they're always quick to make sure that every storm is a Category 3. But you can see it looks like it finally doesn't become a mid-range storm until around hour 222, which would be Thursday the 28th. And by that point, we got another storm that's trying to form around the same place that AOI developed. So, interesting scenario here. I'm not exactly sure whether that's going to be a scenario that plays out. But the conditions aren't really looking as great as they have been. So we shouldn't be looking at too strong of a storm in the case that the AOI forms. Probably a storm that doesn't become a hurricane for a change, since all but one have become hurricanes so far. Looking at the Western Pacific, you can see what's going on at hour 120. You can see the GFS actually develops a storm by hour 120. And I want to make this extremely clear to everyone watching. Would not even a single other model develops this in the slightest. I also checked the ensembles, and this has next to no ensemble support. So what I'm saying is, despite the fact this is in the medium range, I would not listen to this for a second, because I am not sure what's going on here. This is typically something you would say in the silly range, or how out of whack this is, but you know, I have to cover it as this is part of the medium range, and the fact that as per the TWB tradition, we always look at the 18th GFS models. Oh boy. Well, explaining this to you, which really is pointless because this isn't happening, I can see a tropical storm that continues to move northward, doesn't get that strong, or at least not until past the Okinawa Islands, oddly enough, after stalling there for about 24 hours, becomes a typhoon, strengthens rapidly into a Category 2, before striking South Korea with around 85 to 90 mile-an-hour winds, and then quickly dying off as the remnants end up going towards Russia. Yep, that's not something I think I'd have to be saying, but you get the idea. Now we're at 258, so I guess this counts as silly range. But we'll cover what that 984 millibar is doing in it shortly. Here's your shameless plug. You can visit our Force 13 store, buy some merch, our animations, and of course, if you feel the need to scream at a pillow for seeing the GFS runs that we have to deal with here, you can buy a pillow to scream it at as well. Looking at the silly range, starting with the Eastern Pacific at hour 240, you can see what ends up going on in the Eastern Pacific side of things. And there you have it, the AOI finally becomes a hurricane. And okay, maybe I was wrong to say that the storm wasn't going to become a Category 3 in the GFS. Okay, maybe Category 2. We have the other storm also becoming a hurricane now. And there you go, there's Category 3. It's not a GFS run without a Category 3 in the Eastern Pacific, and the trend holds. 962, 961, 959, there you have it. That's a solid Category 3 right there. from a disturbance behind the AOI. So I'm not exactly sure if this is something that can be followed. However, they've been consistent on something falling behind, but this is what we've been dealing with, a train of systems. Whether that continues, possible, but I really wouldn't expect this exact carbon repeat of this run here, especially given the fact that, yeah, I don't think this seems really plausible. Yeah, no. I wish this was the only thing I had to cover for this range, but if you noted during the medium range, we had that really silly Western Pacific storm that was still going on. And this is what's going on in hour 240. You can see I just got done with South Korea. We had that new tropical storm forming to the east of the Philippines, and eventually that also becomes a typhoon in standard GFS fashion, and of course it decides to become a Category 3 as well, and goes straight for Taiwan with a pressure of 945 millibars, rips through them, and then ends up still making a typhoon landfall to the north of Hong Kong. And as that is happening, another typhoon is getting itself set up. 982 millibars. It's a pretty small typhoon at that. You can also see another circulation to the southwest of that. That is another developing disturbance that the GFS is wanting to get squared away. And there you have it, another typhoon right away pretty much. And needless to say, I'm not exactly sure what's going on at hour 384. But I can tell you right now, this is definitely not a solution that's going to happen. If hour 120 to 240 was mind-boggling enough, given the fact that it had literally no support from anyone else, hour 240 plus should be less trustworthy than what you already witnessed here. So, I mean, this is what they're going with. A 969 millibar typhoon and another tiny typhoon basically to the north of that with a undefined pressure because it's not showing it because I guess the pressure gradient is so strong. No clue. I don't know what's going on there. Yeah, GFS is on its typical shenanigans again. It's been a few days. It was expected to happen eventually. Going in onto this day, we're going back to July 19th, 2002. We had Super Typhoon Fang Shen, which would last an incredibly long time as a super typhoon, in fact being one of the heavier ace producers in pretty much what we've ever seen. It's up there in the top 10, I believe. We also had Tropical Depression 13W that would never get named inside the Philippines at the moment. There was also the remnants of Arthur, which had previously been a tropical storm in the Western Atlantic. Of course, you can find more of our on this day products powered by Cyclone History by going onto the tag on the bottom bar below. Well, that brings us over to the next names. In the Atlantic, the next name is Danielle, followed by Earl. In the Eastern Pacific, we're looking out for Frank, followed by Georgette. And in the Central Pacific, while Honda's slogan may be the power of dreams still hasn't given us Hone, which means Honda's slogan is false. Moving on over into the Western Pacific, the next two names here are Sangda, followed by Trazas. And in the North Indian Ocean, the next two names here are Citrang, followed by Mandus. Those two letter names I'm probably going to be saying for quite some time, given the fact that it is still July and, the season doesn't return for another 2 months or so. In the Australian region, we're looking out for Darian and Ellie. In the Southwestern Indian Ocean, we're looking out for Ashley and Belita. And in the South Pacific, the next name up here is Hale. We'll be back for another Tropical Weather Bulletin tomorrow night.